Welcome back. It is great to have you with us for this special deep dive today.
Yeah, really glad to be here and diving back into this.
We are continuing our exclusive content series for the Kaizen Made Easy channel. And today we are jumping right back into Genba Ikigai, Leading to Serve by Mark Forkin.
Right, and it's a progression that, it really challenges conventional corporate wisdom. We've been dissecting how true lean principles are fundamentally about people, not just accelerating an assembly line.
Exactly. And just to set the stage for you listening, we've spent our previous time covering the concept of leading the self.
Yeah.
We looked closely at Hansei, that really demanding practice of self-reflection, and we laid down the foundations of what it means to lead the tribe. But today, we are crossing a major threshold.
We really are.
We are entering habit 14, the habit of engaging others.
Which is, it's arguably the pivot point of the entire methodology. It's the moment where leadership has to transition from just managing discrete tasks to actually generating meaning.
Okay, let's unpack this, because creating an engaging environment sounds like one of those, vague corporate buzzwords that get thrown around in HR seminars.
So, absolutely.
So what does it actually look like in practice, on the ground, according to the source material?
Well, Forkin is very specific here. To understand Habit 14, you have to look at its 3 core pillars. And I want to be clear, this isn't about throwing a pizza party to boost morale.
Right.
It's a deliberate operational structure. The first pillar is agreeing on responsibilities. The second is developing your members through problem solving. And the third is caring for them, like genuinely caring for their well-being.
I want to stop you right there on that first pillar, because I think a lot of managers listening might hear agreeing on responsibilities and just roll their eyes.
Sure.
Because the conventional wisdom is that a boss assigns tasks. You delegate. You tell people what to do because you have deadlines to meet. Why does the text place so much emphasis on the word agreeing?
Because assigning a task is a one-way transaction. It assumes the person receiving the task is just, a pair of hands executing a command.
Right.
Agreeing on a responsibility, however, is a negotiation based on reality. It forces the leader to ask a critical question. Does this employee actually have the training, the time, and the resources to take this on?
And if they don't?
Exactly. When you just assign and the employee fails, you blame the employee. But when you agree on a responsibility, you are taking dual ownership of the outcome. You are ensuring they are prepared.
That shifts the burden heavily onto the leader, though.
It does.
And it bleeds right into that second pillar, developing members through problem solving. Again, I can hear the skeptical mid-level manager saying, I don't have time to develop people through every single problem. Sometimes I just need to give them the answers so we can move on.
And that is the exact trap that keeps organizations stagnant.
Yeah.
If you just give your team the answers, you are training them to be dependent on you. You become the bottleneck for every single decision.
You're doing the thinking for them.
Precisely. Developing them through problem solving means when an issue arises, you guide them to find the root cause themselves. It takes more time in the short term, absolutely. But in the long term, you are building a team of autonomous linkers. You're building capacity.
Which leads us perfectly into one of the most, I think, striking concepts in this section of the book. Forkin states, we pay for the hands that do the work, but the brain comes free.
It's a brilliant distillation of the modern employment contract.
It really is.
When someone joins your team, they're essentially trading 3 things. They give you their time, roughly 8 hours a day. They give you their hands, which is their physical output or labor. And they bring their heads, their intellect, their creativity, their problem-solving capacity.
But leaders usually only focus on 2 of those.
Right. Leaders are obsessed with maximizing the time in the hands. They track keystrokes, they measure output, they monitor breaks, but they systemically fail to engage the mind. They leave this incredible, completely free resource sitting completely untapped.
Let me push back on that, though, because the standard corporate argument is that we do try to pay for the mind. We use incentive structures.
Okay.
We use performance bonuses. If an employee comes up with a great idea that saves the company money, they get a cut. Isn't that engaging the brain?
What's fascinating here is that Forkin explicitly argues against that approach. He points out how organizations try to use financial rewards to squeeze ideas out of people through frameworks like management by objectives or MBOs.
Right, the classic bonus structure.
Exactly. You offer a bonus for an efficiency suggestion. But this approach actually backfires. It breeds incredibly toxic silos.
How so? Because if I'm getting paid for good ideas, shouldn't I be highly motivated to share them?
You are motivated to share them with leadership to get your bonus. You are not motivated to share them with your peers. In fact, you're incentivized to hoard information. If you figure out a better way to do something, you keep it to yourself so you can hit your individual targets and secure your financial reward. It shreds trust across departments.
That makes total sense.
Real engagement, the kind that actually transforms an organization, doesn't come from a transactional bonus structure. It comes from a shared, collective sense as problem solving.
That makes a lot of sense when you look at how large organizations actually function, or frankly fail to function.
Right.
If you've ever worked in a massive corporation, you've probably experienced the absolute nightmare of interdepartmental red tape. The sources provide a case study of a so-called lean corporate culture that took 12 entire months to sign a civil contract.
12 months.
12 months for one signature. And it wasn't because the contract was overly complex.
No, it was because of that exact siloing and hoarding we just talked about, all the different departments.
Legal, finance, operations.
Exactly. They were so busy covering their own backs. They were evaluating every minute detail solely to protect their own specific metrics and avoid individual blame. The workflow ground to an absolute halt because they were acting as competing entities rather than a unified team.
And for Kuhn contrasts that directly with a trust-based culture, where that exact same contract process takes 2 to 4 weeks. The software is the same. The legal requirements are the same. The only difference is that the people aren't looking over their shoulders.
This raises an important question for you, the listener, evaluating your own workplace. When your team is faced with a cross-departmental task, are they engaged in the actual work, or are they engaged in self-preservation?
Wow.
Because self-preservation is the absolute antithesis of engagement. Your brain cannot creatively solve a problem if its primary objective is just surviving the internal politics of the office.
Yeah, we all know the classic parable of the 2 workers in the stone quarry.
Oh, yes.
The one who is miserable says he is smashing rocks, while the other, doing the exact same grueling labor, stands proud and says he is building a cathedral. Usually that story is used to tell employees to just change their attitude. But Forkun uses it differently here.
He uses it to explain the Japanese concept of ikigai, finding a sense of meaning and purpose. But the crucial shift is that he places the burden of ikigai squarely on the leader, not the worker.
Because both workers are doing the identical physical task.
Identical. The second worker has found his ikigai because someone helped him understand how his daily repetitive effort connects to a magnificent final outcome.
So if your team only sees the rocks they are smashing, that is a failure of leadership. It's not that you hired unmotivated people. It's that you failed to show them the cathedral.
Precisely. It is entirely on the leader to connect the daily grind to the larger vision.
But practically speaking, how does a leader maintain the perspective required to do that? Because leaders are under immense pressure, too. They have quotas, they have boards to report to.
They do.
There's a story in the book, The Anecdote of the Priest Pep Talk, that tackles this baseline requirement for leadership. Forkun recounts having lunch with an elderly, well-traveled priest. Forkun is talking about high-level leadership concepts and complex strategic theories. But the priest cuts right through all the corporate jargon.
He really does.
He asks Forkun, "Did you make your bed this morning? Do you eat regular meals? Do you take time to care for your body?"
It strips away all the ego we associate with executive leadership. The priest is pointing out a fundamental truth. True leadership doesn't start with grand organizational strategy. It starts with managing the seemingly unimportant, mundane things within yourself.
Which feels entirely counterintuitive. Why does making my bed dictate whether I can engage my marketing team?
Because it speaks to your personal baseline of discipline and groundedness. If you cannot manage your own daily habits.
If you're in chaos.
Exactly. If you are living in a state of constant personal chaos, skipping meals, running on adrenaline and ego, you lack the internal stability required to focus outward on others. You cannot possibly maintain the empathy and patience needed to help your team see the cathedral if you are emotionally and physically completely unmoored. You have to be deeply grounded in your own humanity before you can engage the humanity of others.
And the sources show us exactly what happens when leaders lose touch with that humanity. There's a case study of a CEO facing a factory closure that is genuinely chilling. It's the ultimate example of treating people purely as hands and completely ignoring the brain or the human being attached to those hands.
It is a very stark illustration. Forkun was running a training cohort for vice presidents at a global industrial company. A CEO approaches him with what he thinks is a logistical dilemma. He's closing a factory, which means laying off 1,400 people.
Right.
And he asks Forkun whether it would be more efficient to fire these 1,400 people on a Monday or a Friday.
He's treating the destruction of 1,400 livelihoods as an administrative scheduling conflict.
An inconvenience to be optimized. And the moment he asks this incredibly callous question, he turns around and hops into his private Learjet to fly to New York. He is entirely disconnected from the reality of the people who generated the wealth that paid for that jet.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because that Learjet CEO is the extreme terminal endpoint of a culture that fails at Habit 14. If you never engage the minds of your people, if you never see them as problem solvers building a cathedral, eventually they just become numbers on a spreadsheet that you delete on a Friday afternoon.
They just become a cost.
Exactly. So the vital question is, how do we actively fight against that disconnect? How do we build real engagement at the Gemba, the actual place where the work happens?
We have to look at leaders who operate at the exact opposite end of the spectrum from that Learjet CEO. The text provides a fantastic example of a female supervisor working in a facility that produces printed medical cartons.
Oh, I love this part.
Yeah, she didn't manage her team from a distant, glass-walled office. She physically went down to the shop floor. She used tape to map out the process blocks right there on the ground for her team to see.
And the power wasn't just in the visual management of taping the floor. It was in her behavior while she was down there. She wasn't standing over them with a clipboard, dictating how fast they needed to move.
No, she used that visual map to foster dialogue. She constantly asked her team, why? But the tone matters here. She wasn't asking, why did you mess this up? She was asking, why do we do it this way? What happens if we change this step?
She was inviting them in?
She was issuing an invitation to their free brains. She was challenging them to be problem solvers, not just robots following a taped line on the floor.
By doing that, she's fulfilling that second pillar we talked about at the beginning, developing members through problem solving. She's not giving them the answers. She's using the physical space of the Gemba to make them think critically about their own workflows.
And this methodology ties directly to a core principle articulated by former Toyota chairperson Cho. His famous directive to all levels of management was simply, go see. He insisted that leaders must go to the front lines. But there's a caveat. You have to go with what Toyota calls an educated eye.
Let's break down what an educated eye actually means. Because a lot of managers go see the front lines, but they do it to assert dominance. They do a walkthrough to catch people making mistakes or to micromanage a process they don't actually understand.
An educated eye requires profound humility. You go to the Gemba to learn from the people who actually touch the product or the customer. You go to observe the friction points in their day, and you go to serve them by removing the obstacles that are preventing them from doing their best work. It is servant leadership operationalized.
It completely inverts the traditional corporate power dynamic. In a standard hierarchy, everyone serves the CEO at the top. But under these principles, the CEO is at the bottom. Their entire job is to support the directors, who support the managers, who support the supervisors, who ultimately support the frontline workers creating the actual value.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you really start to see how these 16 habits in Forkun's framework are inextricably linked. Habit 14, engaging others, cannot exist in a vacuum. You cannot just decide tomorrow that you are going to start engaging your team if you haven't established the groundwork.
Right.
For instance, engaging someone's mind is completely impossible without Habit 7, which we covered earlier, Mendumi, or member care.
Because Mendumi is about creating an environment of deep psychological and physical safety. If I'm an employee and I'm terrified that I'll be yelled at for suggesting a new idea, or if I'm worried that my factory is going to be closed and I'll be fired on a Friday like those 1,400 workers, my brain is shutting down.
The human brain prioritizes survival over innovation. If your people do not feel secure, they will give you their hands to collect a paycheck, but they will absolutely withhold their minds. You cannot engage someone who feels threatened by their own leadership.
And tracing that thread all the way back to the very beginning of the book, it circles directly to Habit 1, Hansei, that sincere practice of self-reflection. Think back to the priest asking about making the bed.
Exactly.
If you haven't taken the time to honestly audit your own behaviors, if you haven't realized that your tendency to micromanage or your reliance on MBO bonuses is actively destroying trust, none of these engagement strategies will work. It always, inevitably, starts with the person in the mirror.
Transformation is never just a new workflow implemented from the top down. It is an inside-out process. You reflect on your own flaws, you establish safety and care for your team, And only then do you earn the right to engage their minds in meaningful work.
So we need to bring this down to the ground for you listening right now. How do you take these concepts and apply them to your team tomorrow morning? The sources outline some very actionable practices. First, it requires that shift in your vocabulary and your mindset that we discussed earlier.
Yes.
Audit how you distribute work. Are you just assigning tasks and walking away? Try shifting to agreeing on responsibilities. Sit down with your team member and negotiate the handoff based on their actual preparedness and the support they need. It changes the entire dynamic from a dictatorship to a collaborative partnership.
Another highly practical takeaway is to examine how you treat the entire life cycle of an employee. Forkin breaks this down into 3 distinct phases: the in phase, the development phase, and the out phase.
Right.
Most companies invest heavily in the in phase. The onboarding is great, the welcome package is nice, everyone is friendly, but true engagement demands that you maintain that exact same level of dignity and respect during their ongoing development. And this is where most companies fail during the out phase when they leave the organization.
The out phase is so critical. Think about that Learjet CEO again. The out phase for those 1,400 people was handled with zero dignity. And the thing leaders forget is that how you treat someone on their way out the door broadcasts your true, unfiltered values to everyone who is still inside the building.
It absolutely does.
If you treat a departing employee like a traitor or a disposable asset, the team members who remain will immediately realize that their psychological safety is an illusion.
They will realize they are just smashing rocks, and their engagement will plummet accordingly.
Which brings us to the reflection questions we want to leave you with today. Look at the people you manage or the colleagues you work alongside. Are you operating in a way that just pays for their hands? Or are you actively structuring the work to invite their heads? Take a hard look at the environment you've helped create. Are the people around you just miserably smashing rocks to hit a metric? Or are you doing the hard, empathetic work of helping them see the cathedral?
Because ultimately, those are the questions that separate someone who merely manages from someone who truly leads.
And this conversation is far from over. Next time on the Kaizen Made Easy series, we are going to push this deep dive even further by moving into Habit 15, the habit of supporting others. We're going to focus heavily on the concept of and-on.
It's a fascinating exploration of how the simple act of pulling a cord to stop a process and ask for help is actually the ultimate culture-changing tool an organization can wield for ensuring quality.
It totally flips the traditional corporate script on how we view mistakes and vulnerability in the workplace. You really won't want to miss it. So to ensure you catch that, please subscribe to the Kaizen Made Easy YouTube channel. And if you want to follow along and really internalize these habits for your own leadership journey, grab a copy of Mark Forkin's Gemba Ikigai Leading to Serve on Amazon. So what does this all mean? As we wrap up this look at Habit 14 and the power of engaging others, where does this leave us?
We've established today that while an organization pays for employees' time and physical labor, their brain comes free. But I want to leave you with the inverse of that equation. Think about the hidden, truly catastrophic costs to your organization and, frankly, to society as a whole when you leave that incredible human resource completely untapped. When millions of people spend half their waking lives just smashing rocks because no leader ever took the time or possessed the empathy to show them the cathedral, the cost of that lost potential is immeasurable, and the choice to change that reality sits entirely in your hands.
A massive, sobering thought to end on. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We will see you next time as we continue our journey into Genba Ikigai.